The dilemma with the Affordable Care Act is, should even the House remain in control of the Republican Party, much less that both houses become in control of the Republican Party, then the Affordable Care Act will not be fully implemented. It will be starved of the necessary resources and funding that are going to be needed to ensure that all aspects of the Affordable Care Act are actually fully implemented. And of course, if Romney should become president, and our Republican friends control both houses, Senate and House, then you can be pretty sure that the Affordable Care Act will be history. So, it really is about where this country will be in 2013 and beyond, and to what extent the American public will be willing to once again renew a social contract that in its simplest form had the public willing to raise taxes for whatever good things, willing to invest in others, willing to sacrifice in the short term so that there will be communal benefits in the long term. Whether it was the greatest generation after the Great Depression, whether it was investments in our highways and our public infrastructure, the GI Bill after World War II, whether it was the expansion of public benefits in the 1960s and beyond. I mean, we really have reached a crossroads as to where the American public will lean or fall or decide in terms of whether or not they want the kind of social contract we've enjoyed the last 30 to 60 years, or they want to go to some other version which some cynics would say would bring us back to the 1920s and before, but that's what the cynics might say. But it comes down to this. This country is living beyond its means. I mean, I think that's pretty evident in terms of our annual deficits and our accumulating national debt. And taxes are at the lowest rates since the 1960s, the 1970s. Mr. Ryan, who's a vice presidential candidate with George Romney, has done us all a huge favor. He's essentially told us what their plan is going to be. Again, Bill Clinton laid it out so well. And that plan is pretty simple. Lower taxes even below the current Bush tax cuts and continue the Bush tax cuts. Reduce federal spending by 20% and ensure that the Defense Department and military spending is protected. And everything else will have to be sacrificed. And everything else is all the other programs that the federal government's involved with. But more relevant to what we're interested in is Medicare and Medicaid. And again, I keep referring to Bill Clinton. He laid it out quite clearly what Mr. Ryan has proposed, and Mr. Romney and the Tea Party wing of the Republican Party is going to seriously consider, if not actually pursue, is to move Medicare into a voucher premium support system, which is a nice way of saying that if it's instituted, no longer will there be a social insurance universal guarantee that as long as you qualify, the federal government will find the funds to pay for Medicare coverage, but will be given a voucher with X amount, and you shop on the open market in the private insurance industry, and if you can find something for the amount the federal government gives you, fine. If it's less than that, you keep the difference. If it's more than that, you pay out of pocket. GAO and the CBO have made it really clear in their rational analysis that it will dramatically increase out-of-pocket costs for senior citizens. But our Republican friends are really smart. What they're laying out very clearly is, but for those voters today and those Medicare beneficiaries, not to worry, it will only affect those that are under 55 years of age. Under 55 years of age. So those of us like myself, I'm 64 now, I'm cool. I'm in. I'm protected. So I don't care about everybody else. But what's happening here, and this comes from our AARP surveys, but other surveys are bringing them out, is that the 65 and over electorate is really concerned about what the Democrats are doing to Medicare and the arguments that our Republican friends are stating that Mr. Obama has taken $715 billion out of Medicare and the Affordable Care Act. They emphasize this will ruin Medicare. Of course, the president continues to say, we didn't take it away from benefits, reducing reimbursements to doctors, providers, hospitals, et cetera. We're strengthening Medicare. But the senior population, and this is something that personally gives me a great deal of angst, President Obama in 2008 got a majority of every age group with one exception, the 65 and over. In the polling on the Affordable Care Act, the age group that is most opposed to the Affordable Care Act is the 65 and over. And it's expected, Ron Brownstein with the National Journal has been doing a lot of in-depth polling and we've become very good colleagues. President Obama will lose an even larger proportion of the 65 and over group. So we've got a real interesting dichotomy here. For those of us that consider ourselves advocates on behalf of older persons protecting Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, in fact, that constituency, by a large proportion, is not comfortable with our progressive positions. Now, whether it's ignorance on their part, or objective perceptions, or this is just how they feel, we can't argue, we have to respect that. But the older vote is pretty much written off as a Romney vote. So the president has to focus on independents, on women, and Hispanics to try to get that small margin. But when it comes to Medicare, much of these debates swirl around whose views are believed by that 65 and over population. But for those of us that are concerned about low-income individuals and persons with disability and are deeply concerned that the only public financing we have for institutional care and some versions of home and community-based care, it's a Medicaid program, the Medi-Cal program, which has not been given any attention in the current debates, except again for Bill Clinton. You kind of get my thing here. Although I was kind of, just on the side, it was kind of warmed my heart, and a lot of us, to hear not just Democrats, but even Republicans are saying something like, gee, if only we didn't have a 2-term limit for President of the United States, Bill Clinton could consider running again, but we'll see what happens when Hillary's time comes. But in either event, the Medicaid program, the Ryan plan is to block grant the Medicaid program, and to essentially just have a flat annual federal amount that's divided by the states, among the states, which almost certainly mean fewer dollars per state, and the states would just have to decide where to cut, who wins, and who loses. So we're going to see potentially the end of that universal coverage for low-income individuals. And then there's Social Security. There's Social Security. In some respects, Social Security is not on the table like Medicare and Medicaid, yet it too is not safe from the vagaries of these shifting political winds and the uncertainty about the public as to what they want from their government and what they want for themselves. And with Social Security, you know, in many respects, that program's in reasonably good shape. But we're going to see once again in 2013 efforts to try to privatize Social Security and move them once again towards these individual accounts. But what has not been spoken about, which concerns many of us, is the Social Security payroll holiday. For those of you that get good wages, which is all the faculty here in this room, you'll notice in your monthly or bi-monthly paycheck that you're not paying as much in your FICA taxes, right? You're not paying as much in your FICA taxes because there's a Social Security payroll holiday, which for a lot of us gives us a couple of $100 more each month, which is kind of cool. What I fear, many of us fear that are kind of policy wonks in Social Security, and we're going to have our annual conference of the National Association of Social Insurance, and no pun intended, that this payroll tax holiday is a Trojan horse. Because it now puts Social Security for the first time in its 70-plus year history. It puts it at risk. Think about it. How many politicians want to bring back a tax? And to reinstate the Social Security payroll tax is going to be a very, very difficult political decision by members of the U.S. Congress, especially if we continue to have this level of a recession. And you might ask, well, how are we covering the cost of that payroll tax holiday? It's being paid out of general funds. Where do the general funds come from? nowhere, they're just added to the deficit and the accumulating national debt. So many of us truly worry if we do not reinstate that payroll tax, which is difficult under the best of circumstances, it could dramatically lower public support. The Ryan plan proposes means testing the payroll tax. Means testing the Social Security program. And that too will be a Trojan horse because it will finally lose the upper income voters who have been an important mainstay for the Social Security program. So even though Social Security is not on the table per se, there's these proposals that are very much on the table in a drawer that will be brought out after 2013. So now let me wind down and try to bring it to something a little more positive. Take another drink. But the real fun, the real excitement in issues of aging and aging policy and politics is going to be right after November, during the lame duck session in the latter days of November and December, and in the new Congress come January. January is a drop-dead timeline for either imposing the draconian cuts and extending the tax cuts, etc. That's referred to as a fiscal cliff, which, by the way, would result in $500 billion reduction from the Pentagon and all our military services. There's huge bad things that can happen after January 2013 if compromises are not reached. But I will say this, and I'll give you my personal insight, and then I'll end it on a positive note. My personal insight is this. We cannot assume that things will remain the same. Even if it's a President Obama, it will at least be a Republican House. But even progressive Democrats have come to a realization that we cannot sustain the fiscal trajectory this country has been moving towards. And in fact, there will have to be some major modifications to the Medicare program, the Medicaid program, and potentially Social Security. And so there will be changes. I am involved with AARP, and I've agreed to stay on the board because with all its imperfections, AARP, when push comes to shove, is the only advocacy group at the national level that has the clout to be at the table in the cigar-filled rooms when the White House and the leadership of the Senate and House come together and do those grand bargains. And so, not to be an AARP fanatic or anything, but in fact, we need that kind of advocacy at the national level, and big decisions, big changes, big compromises will be made early in 2013, throughout 2013, and not to be overly dramatic, which in fact may well affect our aging, our retirement in the years to come. So it's exciting, it's a little scary of sorts, but let me end it this way. Time is on our side. Time is on our side. And just to summarize, first, we are living longer, which is good news. Secondly, the elderly are growing in numbers, and if they continue their level of political participation and voting, they will be a larger proportion of the population. And Latinos and their ship is about to arrive. And we're all well aware that the U.S. by 2050 will be a majority-minority nation, and Latinos will be the largest minority group, with Asians growing very fast right behind them. And so this will be a new and different, and I think even more exciting and opportunist type of society for all of us. But a few things on the side that we just need to know. Mexico and Latin America will need to be partners for what we hope to do. I've been in Mexico a couple of times, and as recent reports have shown, Mexico is aging as well. Their fertility rate is now about 2.1, roughly, and declining. So Mexico is no longer what everyone perceives a young nation. It's getting older, like the rest of us and much of the world. And immigration is close to zero. Now, whether or not it comes back is still uncertain, but there's some that will say we may never again see the level of immigration from Mexico in particular, and Central America and Latin America that we've seen before.